Okay, so in the next few lectures, I want to talk about evaluating arguments. Basically, how do you know if an argument is a good one? And now, look, this material, a lot of it kind of just goes back over some stuff Vaughn went over. Um, but even so, even though a lot of this was in the reading and we're taking another pass at it, I know we're going through this stuff fairly quickly. There is a lot to be said on evaluating arguments. Um, in fact, TCC and most colleges offer a class on nothing but evaluating arguments, a logic class, right? I taught one last semester. I'm teaching one again in the spring semester of 2021. You can fill a whole class with this stuff. We're only going to spend a week on it. So we're going through some things pretty quickly. I do realize that. But even though we're going through pretty quickly, I think it is important to take at least a first pass at this stuff so we'll be familiar with it as it comes up in the course going forward. All right. So let's get into this question of evaluating arguments. How can we tell if an argument is a good one? Right? When you read an argument, you probably a lot of times will get a sense, okay, well, that seems pretty convincing, or, well, it's kind of convincing, but I don't know, or, wait, that went terribly wrong, this seems fishy, I don't know why, right? So usually when we read or hear an argument, we have some vague sense whether it's a good one. Well, I want you guys to be in a position where we get a little bit beyond that, where we can do a little more. Not just, that sense is a good place to start, but how do we go beyond that? If it is a good argument, how do we know that it is? If it's bad, how do we put our finger on where it went wrong? There are a few different methods here, and I'm going to go over them in the next few lectures, but an important one, a good first step, is to distill the argument. What do I mean by distilling an argument? Well, to distill an argument, it's important that we first think a bit about how arguments are supposed to work. In an argument, you're going to have a series of premises, series of statements that support another statement, the conclusion of the argument. Or sometimes an argument will have multiple conclusions, but at the very least it'll have one conclusion, right? Conclusion, this claim that I'm trying to convince other people of. Premises, statements that provide support for that claim. So what distilling means is that we first cut out everything from the argument that doesn't provide rational support for the conclusion. Then we put the premises and the conclusion in a numbered form, with the premises going in some kind of logical order and the conclusion at the end. So let's go through an argument step by step how we distill it. The first step for distilling an argument is to identify the conclusion or conclusions, right? These are short passages, so it's pretty easy to do. Longer passages, it might be more challenging. But when you want to distill an argument, ask yourself, what is the conclusion the person is trying to establish? Usually, in good writing, the conclusion will be toward the beginning or at the end, often in both places. Sad fact is, well, not everyone who writes is a good writer, right? Often, unfortunately, the conclusion will be buried somewhere in the middle. Sometimes the person won't even state it, it's implied, so it can be challenging to find, right? But that is the first step of distilling an argument. Let's find the conclusion. So we'll just go with that argument I gave in last lecture. You guys are probably an easy audience for this one. We shouldn't have exams in college classes, right? This is like telling children should get more candy, right? Or telling college professors we should be paid more, right? You are probably a receptive audience to this claim. But anyway, let's go through the argument itself, right? What's the conclusion? The conclusion is right here, beginning of the passage. I've highlighted it in blue here, right? College classes should not have midterm exams or finals. You know, in the original passage, I had it in two places, but I just won't, have it at the end this time. So that's the conclusion. Next step, when we distill an argument, we're only looking for the statements, the premises that provide support for the conclusion. Anything that's sort of repetitive, or that's just a matter of rhetoric, we are going to cut. So think about this passage. In fact, the whole practice is ridiculous. Why do I say this? Well, I've highlighted that stuff in red here. That's just rhetoric. That's not giving the person any reason to believe it. So we just cut it, right? Now, I'm not gonna go through exactly every step, but look, next step is let's take the statements we have, number them, and put them in the right order, right? Conclusion should always go at the end. College classes should not have midterm or final exams. That's our conclusion. We'll put it at the very end here, right? Now, in some arguments, it will be important the order we put the premises in. Here, the premises don't really tie in with each other, so we can put them in pretty much any order we want. I'll just put them in pretty much the order they were in the passage. The important thing here is conclusion should go at the end. All right. So distilled argument 1, studies have shown that in the long term, students forget most of the material that they learn when cramming for exams. 2, taking a test is an artificial situation that doesn't reflect or measure any skills that might be useful in the real world. 3, exams create stress for students. 4, conclusion, so college classes should not have midterm or final exams. Now look, one of the things I want you to notice is that I think already it's useful to put things in this form, right? If you don't accept the conclusion, again, you guys are probably a pretty easy audience for this one, but if you didn't, or even if you accepted the conclusion but had a sense that the argument maybe wasn't convincing, needed to say more, well, having the premises in this form makes it easy, right? Look at the premises here, ask yourself, well, are these true? Where might I need more evidence, right? Look at the argument, think about that for a second, right? Exams create stress for students. Well, that one's pretty obvious. We probably don't need a lot of proof for that one, right? But look at 1 or 2, right? Studies have shown that in the long term, students forget most of the material they learn when cramming for exams. Well, if this premise mentions studies, that's kind of just waving your hands, right? You want to see those studies, right? Premise 1 is probably a weaker point in the argument. Before we accept it, we need a source for those studies. We need some evidence for this claim, right? 2, taking a test is an artificial situation. Well, again, if we want to evaluate the argument, we want to ask, is that always so, right? Are there cases where the exam might actually reflect something you run into in real life, right? If the exam is, CPR and you have to do CPR on a dummy, well, not exactly like real life, right? But not completely different, right? So distilling the argument allows us to see, which of these premises do we accept? Which ones seem obviously true? Which ones might we want to push back on a little bit? Which ones might we want more argument for? And that's why distilling, especially for arguments that, might be a little tricky, is often very useful. I will do this a lot in class. For important arguments, we will almost always distill them like this. So here's another example of an argument, just to give you guys a better idea how this works. It is wrong to eat meat. Animals that are raised for meat are always raised in terrible conditions, which causes them pain. They are also slaughtered inhumanely, which causes more pain. It is wrong to cause pain without a good reason. The pleasure we get from eating meat is not a good reason to cause animals pain. That means that it is wrong to eat meat. So look at the passage, how would you distill this, right? First, we spot our conclusion. This one does, it repeats its conclusion. It's there at the beginning or end. Good writing will usually at least gesture toward the conclusion in the beginning and repeat it in the end, right? I am not saying this is good writing. I won't make that claim for it. But, that's often a very good idea. It gives the reader an idea of what you're trying to establish, right? Well-written pieces will generally do something like that. That'll be important when writing your papers. Give your readers some idea of what conclusion you're going towards. It's not fun as a reader to be left guessing, oh, what's this person arguing for? I don't know. Anyway, so how would we distill this? Well, obviously, since the conclusion is stated twice in slightly different words, we can just cut one of those, right? Then let's put the premises in a sort of logical form. And here I think it does matter, a little bit more what order we put them in, right? The argument's trying to establish, well, it's wrong to cause pain without a good reason. It says that, and it's trying to establish, well, all these practices around eating meat cause pain. It's not a good reason, right? So, animals that are raised from meat are always raised in terrible conditions, which causes them pain. They are also slaughtered inhumanely, which causes more pain. It is always wrong to cause pain without a good reason. The pleasure we get from eating meat is not a good reason to cause animals pain. Therefore, it is wrong to eat meat. Now, again, I think once you have this in this distilled form, you can go through and look at the premises individually and say, well, do I accept these? Are they true or not, right? Gives you some idea, if you think the argument's not a good one, where it might go wrong. Just to show you guys my cards a little bit, I'm obviously not convinced by this because I'm going to go downstairs and have a ham sandwich for lunch after I get done recording these, right? I may feel a little guilty about it, but I've not been convinced of the truth of vegetarianism just yet. But well, where does this argument go wrong, right? Well, 3 seems pretty obviously true to me, right? It is always wrong to cause pain without a good reason, right? We might want to hear more on what a good reason is. Argument doesn't necessarily need to establish that. A lot of times when I give this argument to students, they'll say, well, I don't see 3. And I'm like, really? I hope you see 3, right? You need a good reason for it to be morally acceptable to cause pain for others, right? So 3, that one seems acceptable. That's not where we want to push back or ask for more evidence if we don't accept the argument, right? Well, what is that, right? Well, 1 maybe, right? 1 says, well, animals that are raised for meat are always raised in terrible conditions. Is that necessarily true, right? At the very least, we want more proof for that claim, right? It's probably not even true because there are humane farm practices where animals have pretty good conditions. Maybe the meat most of us eat isn't raised in those conditions, but that at least exists. We might not want to accept this always claim, right? They are also slaughtered inhumanely. Well, again, we at least want more proof for that, and it might not be true as written because there do seem to be humane ways to slaughter animals, right? So hopefully you guys are already seeing that distilling allows us to go a little bit beyond just, well, I have a sense this is a good argument or it's not, right? There are some more things we can do to help us evaluate arguments, though. So I'll go into more depth in this in the next lecture, but one of the things we can do to evaluate an argument is to look at the form of the argument and then the content of the argument. The form of an argument is the way that everything is supposed to fit together to support the conclusion. The content is the stuff the argument actually says. Form, the way the premises are supposed to support the conclusion. Content, the actual claims made by the premises themselves. You know, a useful way to think of this is think about a building, right? If you have garbage materials, the building's going to fall down even if you have a great plan, right? That's content. But on the same token, if you have like the best materials in the world, but your plan for the building is terrible, it's also going to fall down, right? To build a good house or whatever, you need a good plan and you need good materials. Same way with arguments. To make a good argument, you need to put the premises together in the right way. You need to have a good plan. Premises also need to be true or at the very least acceptable or plausible, right? So we'll talk more about this. I think it's often useful, and we'll get into this in the next lecture, to think about the form of the argument first and then to dig into the content. We'll talk about why that is. We'll talk about a bit more about what good form, bad form of arguments are, but I just want to introduce the idea now. So we'll talk about more advanced stuff, with evaluating form and content in the next few lectures, but at least, even now I think we can take a first pass at it, right? When evaluating the form of an argument, ask yourselves, do the premises really support or establish this conclusion? If these premises are true, does it really give me a reason to believe this conclusion, and how good a reason? Once you ask yourself that, look at the content, right? Ask yourself, do I accept these premises? Are they true? Are they good premises? Even if you accept them, how comfortable are you with them? How, you might think they're true, but how sure are you they're true? How confident are you about that? Anyway, those are just good first steps. We'll go into more depth with both of those in the next lecture. Actually, the next few lectures.